China is having a harder time with youth unemployment, which is happening at the same time as other economic problems. The real estate market has a lot of debt, which is hurting the economy. Trade problems with Western countries are also making things less certain. The youth jobless rate rose from 13.2% in June to 17.1% in July, which is the highest level seen this year. This rise happened after Beijing changed how they figure out unemployment so that students are no longer counted. The number is scary, but it might not show the whole picture because it only includes data from cities and leaves out a lot of young people from rural places. In June of last year, youth unemployment hit 21.3%, but the Chinese government stopped releasing the numbers and changed how they're calculated, which made people worry about how reliable the data is. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you won't miss out on any new videos. The lack of jobs for young people is just one part of China's bigger economic problems. There is a lot of debt in the real estate market, and trade problems with the West are making things worse. Still, at 5.2%, the general unemployment rate stayed the same in July. However, the rate for people aged 25 to 29 rose from 6.4% in June to 6.5%, which shows that the job market is getting tighter. China hasn't recovered as quickly as people thought it would after lifting strict COVID-19 limits more than a year and a half ago. It was hoped that industrial production growth would pick up quickly, but it slowed down in July. These issues, along with rising unemployment, are making investors less confident and giving Chinese leaders more problems to solve. Because China's leaders see the crisis getting worse, they have made youth unemployment a top priority. President Xi Jinping said in May that this problem needs to be fixed quickly because it affects so many young people. The problem is even worse now that 11.8 million college graduates are leaving the workforce this June, making the job market even more competitive. In response, the government put in place 20 new rules this month that are meant to increase spending in the country and boost growth. But it's still not clear if these steps will be enough to stop the decline, especially since China's economy is still having a hard time. China's economic recovery is at a crucial point, as shown by the rising jobless rate. The government's ability to fix these problems will have a big impact on the country's future. In 2012, Xi Jinping came up with the idea of the Chinese dream. He said that it was the revitalization of the Chinese nation, which meant national wealth, a strong nation, and happiness for the people. But China seems to be facing a different reality now that he is in charge. The market is going down quickly, and a lot of people are having a hard time. That which used to be called the Chinese dream is now called China is poor. The New York Times recently talked about a poll from 2014 that found 77% of Chinese people felt richer than they did 5 years before. 10 years later, that number has dropped to just 39%. This big drop shows that poverty is getting worse, as 61% of people now say they are having trouble paying their bills. A senior researcher on Chinese issues at Taiwan's National Chengchi University, S. Chang, said that Chinese people now have 10 difficulties. They have trouble eating, dressing, getting an education, finding work, getting married, raising children, finding a place to live, getting medical care, taking care of the elderly, and even planning funerals. From birth to death, these problems show up at every stage of life, making it hard to stay alive every day. S. Guang also said that China is going through a historical change from the Chinese dream to Chinese poverty. The 8 harsh words he used to describe the current economy were deep and incurable. And he listed the 10 most worrisome trends. The huge difference in wealth is one of the biggest problems. Official numbers show that about 960 million people in China make less than 2,000 yuan a month. That's almost 70% of the population. At the same time, only 10% of China's people own 90% of the country's wealth, leaving the other 99% with nothing. There is a big difference between the rich and the poor. There are about 200 million poor people in China, according to the World Bank. The richest families have 359 times more money than the poorest ones. 2. The social volcano. Chinese and foreign researchers who worked on the study Social Volcano found that people in China used to think they were poor because they weren't working hard enough or didn't have enough skills. Now, though, people say it's because of an unfair system and uneven chances. This is what Songgang calls a social volcano, full of simmering anger. People are fed up with Xi Jinping's government and don't see a bright future for themselves. 3. The term social suicide. Recently, there have been sad stories about people who tried to kill themselves as a last resort. After the real estate market crashed, a woman who worked for CICC jumped to her death because she couldn't make her mortgage payments. In a different case, a smart woman from Beijing's best university killed herself in her rented apartment after failing to get a government job despite doing very well on the tests. Many job chances in China seem to depend on who you know, or even on paying bribes. This makes many young people who don't have these connections feel hopeless and leads them to commit social suicide as a silent way to protest. 4. The struggles of the elderly. China's population is getting older quickly. There are about 290 million people over 60 in the world right now. That number will rise to over 400 million by 2035, and it will reach 500 million by 2050. As China's economy continues to slow down, taking care of its elderly has become a very important problem. An expert, S. Gwen, says that China's welfare system is unfair because it helps the rich and leaves the poor to fight for themselves. In Western countries, welfare tends to help the poor, but in China, the system seems to greatly favor the rich and CCP officials. These elites have homes, healthcare, cars, and bonuses, but older people in rural areas don't have much help and have to deal with a hard and lonely old age. 5. The collapse of the catering industry. The food business in Beijing is in trouble. According to the Beijing Statistics Bureau, restaurants that make more than 10 million yuan a year only made 180 million yuan in profit in the first half of the year. This is an amazing 88.8% drop from the same time last year. At just 0.37%, profit margins are so low that the whole industry is fighting to stay alive. More than 1.265 million catering services had their licenses taken away by the end of 2023. This was twice as many as in 2022 and the highest rate since 2012. The trend kept going in early 2024, when another 1.56 million businesses closed or lost their licenses. About 460,000 food businesses closed in the first quarter of 2024, which is 232% more than the 140,000 that closed during the same time last year. A lot of new businesses didn't even last a month. Some closed 3 days after they opened. During this economic slump, a new business has sprung up to serve corpse collectors. The main thing these people do is pick up used cooking tools, tableware, and other things that restaurants leave behind and then sell them again. One business owner in Guangzhou said that the local food industry has been hit hard since March. Every month, 40 to 50 sets of restaurant equipment are recycled, with 70% of those sets coming from hot pot restaurants and the rest from milk tea shops. Sixth, tough competition. Chinese businesses are in a brutal race to the bottom because there are too many of them. Demand at home is low, and there are lots of goods that haven't been sold. Many have cut their prices, which has led to fierce price wars. For example, in the steel industry, profits fell by 88% year-over-year and 90% month-over-month in July 2024, leaving only 1% of businesses just barely making it with small earnings. In the same way, prices for important solar energy products, silicon materials, wafers, battery cells, and parts have dropped by 40%, 48%, 36%, and 15% since the beginning of 2024, reaching all-time lows. A few businesses have even gone below the cost line, which means they're losing money. 7. Leading businesses that aren't stable. One of the best car companies in China, Evergrande, has a branch that makes new energy vehicles. In the first half of 2024, they lost a huge 20.25 billion yuan, which is 194.73% more than the same time last year. It took them this long to sell only 40 cars. Besides that, China's real estate market is in a free fall. 10 of the biggest real estate companies in the world are either in debt or about to go out of business. Even Vanke, which is one of the biggest real estate producers in China and the world, is in danger of going out of business. 8. How the middle class fell apart. The sudden drop in piano sales, which are a sign of middle-class rank in China, is a shocking sign that the middle class is shrinking. 7,000 piano shops have closed in the last year. The two biggest names, Helen Piano and Juhi Piano, both lost money in the first half of 2024. Many piano factories in Luos Town, Huo City, Henan Province, which is known as the piano capital of China, have closed. This really shows how hard things are for the middle class in China. 9. The rise of unfinished children. A whole group of smart, educated young people have been left behind by Xi Jinping's focus on high-tech industries and pushing for new levels of productivity. These unfinished children are college graduates who can't find good jobs and have to take low-paying ones or stay jobless. In China this year, a record 11.79 million people graduated from college. However, the jobless rate for 16 to 24-year-olds in cities hit 17.1% in July 2024, which was the highest rate this year. And that doesn't even count young people from distant areas or students who are still looking for work. 10. Lots of debt and bad money. Both the national government and local governments in China owed 114 trillion yuan by 2022. Besides that, state-owned companies owed 220 trillion yuan, and the banking system owed 56 trillion yuan. There was 390 trillion yuan in debt in China, which is 3 times the country's GDP. It is easy to say that China's economy is growing too slowly to cover its huge debts. The Chinese government keeps spending a lot of money on big projects to improve its image around the world, even though the economy looks bad and a lot of people are poor. Foreign help, the China Starlink project, the building of the Grand Canal, and the Peace Ark operation are all examples of this. China wants to look strong on the world stage, even though many of its own people are having a hard time making ends meet. One commentator said it straight out: Xi Jinping's Chinese dream isn't really about making people's lives better. It's more about him building his own kingdom. He joked that the CCP is busy scattering flowers, making things look nice when things are really bad, while the people are suffering.